Today I'm talking to Eric Fulwiler, Chief Commercial Officer at 11FS. 11FS is a consultancy that helps some of the biggest banks in the world launch their digital propositions. Eric, welcome to the Fintech Files.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I'm going to ask straight away the question that I've completely stolen from your podcast, the Fintech Marketing Podcast. What is your favorite financial brand? And it cannot be 11FS.
So I was thinking about this morning. Great question, by the way. So there's two that pop to mind. One immediately, and more so because I just used it recently, and that's Kava, the car insurance app. And I actually don't know too much about their brand or marketing, but I think that I really believe that in many cases the best marketing is a great product. And I think the use case that they solve for, the way the product works, it's just a great brand in my experience. So that's Kava. And then the other one, when I thought about it a little bit more of like, okay, who's actually, doing some interesting things on the branding and marketing side is Dead Happy, another insurance startup, life insurance startup. And I just love how they approach it. It's just so different from the traditional life insurance brands out there. Just the name itself, Dead Happy, and the way they explain it and talk about it. I think they're doing a great job. So those are the two that I would give you.
Wonderful. And to be very honest, I hadn't heard about them, but that shows how much depth there is in this fintech market and how many brands are doing fantastic stuff. So now to get to you and your career. So you're Chief Commercial Officer at 11FS, a brand that I definitely admire and love all the content and reports that you guys do. Um, first, let's go back to the beginning. So you come from a media marketing background. What made you choose that as a career?
So I actually didn't choose it directly. I kind of fell into it. I started my career in nonprofit and just got, I was young and starting out and got a little bit frustrated at not being able to have the impact that I thought a career in nonprofit would have for me. And so I decided I wanted to go into the private sector, go into business, and maybe at some point come back to the public sector or nonprofit. Still a little bit TBD. But yeah, I just started asking around people who were more experienced and networked than I. And one of them knew the CEO at Forbes.com who was looking for somebody to figure out, I'm using air quotes for people who are listening, figure out this social media thing. And this was 2008, 2009. I was like, I'll give it a shot. And you know how it is. Once you start something, then you're in that world and your network grows in that world and people know you for that. And that's kind of what set me off on that track. But I will say, while I didn't choose media marketing intentionally to begin with, the reason I've been in this industry in this career track for as long as I have is I'm just so fascinated by trying to understand what makes people tick, because I think that's what good marketing at least is at the end of the day. Like how do people change behavior and perception around things? I think that's a fascinating and probably the most challenging prompts and challenge that you could have in a lot of professions. And for me, that's on two levels. That's the mass marketing level of how do you get an audience, a sector, a group of consumers to think or do things differently. But then also, which I think is much more my job these days, on the team and organizational level. So leadership management, how do you get people to think and do differently and do it in a consistent and aligned way?
Great. And you come from, so fast forward in your career, before 11FS, you come from Viner Media, hope you pronounce it right, but it's probably the ultimate new media shop. Can you tell us a bit more about it for those that are not familiar with? I guess many are, but and also what you brought from there into 11FS.
Sure. Yeah. So actually worked at VaynerMedia twice. Gary Vaynerchuk, who's the CEO, I met him when he was just kind of starting it with his brother. And so I joined as one of the first 10 to 15 people, and we started to build it. It's a digital agency if you had to give it a single nomenclature, but at this point it's so many other things. And then I went back to work for them to open the office in London, which has what brought me over to this side of the pond almost 5 years ago. And so, yeah, I certainly learned a lot from Gary, and being at Vayner at that stage of my career definitely had a big imprint on me as a professional. And I think part of what I brought, particularly in my last job, which was as the MD of the London office and starting the business over here in UK and Europe from scratch, is I learned a lot about building teams and growing businesses. And part of what I realized in that is that that's actually what I love to do. And advertising just happened to be the output of it, being in the agency world for so long. And so that's what made me kind of pick my head up and start to think about what else I wanted to do and coming back to the startup world and being brand side here at 11FS.
Yeah, and what brought you then to the fintech world and 11FS, and how did you find the change?
Yeah, it's been great so far. So it's been a year and 3 months, I think, that I've been here, a little over a year. Man, there's so much going on in fintech. I mean, that sounds so obvious and almost naive to say, but as someone who, lived in London and New York and San Francisco, you kind of think, what's going on in different areas of technology and quote unquote disruption, but there's so much happening in this space. And that was one of the things that appealed to me about it for sure. And also being in London where a lot of that change is happening and being pushed forward. But a lot of it for me in terms of ending up here and at 11FS and really any job that I've ever taken comes much more to the people than it does the actual business or the industry or the role. And so I'd known David and a couple of the people over here at 11FS for a couple of years and was always a fan of what they did and how they did it. And so I think with jobs and with businesses, so much of it is much more the bet and the fit of the people rather than it is the business or the industry. And that's kind of how I made my decision to come here, and it's been great so far.
Wonderful. I thought you were going to tell me about audience building and stuff like that. So refreshing answer. So tell us a bit more about 11FS. I think it's hard to avoid it, or let's put it in. Many people would anybody who's interested in fintech at this stage must have heard something from 11FS, because you guys are so good at putting your message out there and creating so much content. But yes, tell us a bit about more about the company.
Yeah, for sure. And to your point, there's certainly a lot that I learned about audience building and the tactics and strategy of marketing over the years. I know we're going to talk a little bit about that later on. But I really do, one of my first principles, if you will, is that I think it's so much about the people and understanding people and working with people and teams and all that stuff. And that's much more how I think about what I do. So I think that's kind of where when I talk about like my career, my background and things like that, that's very much where I go. But of course, there's a lot under the hood when it comes to how I think about marketing, which I know we'll get into. So in terms of 11FS, what we do is we build next generation financial services. And so there's a lot that goes into that. And it's something that, I know we're going to talk about in terms of how we got there and just describing what the company does, because essentially it's a bunch of different businesses under one group umbrella, under one brand. So you've got products, services, and content that all ladder up to that problem that we solve, if you will, of building next generation financial services. So on the product side, you have Pulse and Foundry. Pulse is a content library of fintech user journeys from around the world. So for people that want to understand what good looks like and benchmark their own product development against best in class fintech apps anywhere in the world, we have a subscription product to allow people to see those. And then Foundry is our core banking technology product that we've been building out for the last couple of years. Services, which is what I oversee now in my role as CCO, is consulting and research. And that's the bulk, I'd say, of what we're known for in terms of work output. So that's actually the research, design, product management, build, launch of truly digital propositions. So building Metal for NatWest and things like that, like challenger fintech propositions, usually for more incumbent financial service institutions. And then there's the content side that I also oversee. So that's media marketing. And that's a lot of probably where people start and where they're first exposed to the 11FS brands with FinTech Insider and InsurTech Insider and the After Dark events and FinTech in 5 newsletter and all the video content and so much stuff that team does a great job at producing.
All right. So just to dig a bit more and understand better the 11FS proposition, Um, who would be typically the customer? Well, you mentioned an incumbent bank or a fintech, and they would come to you for one specific part, or just to help them in the journey to become, let's say, a regular bank, become more digital, offer new services, and then you would, well, how would that work?
Yeah, that's it. It's really anybody who is looking um, to develop truly digital financial service propositions. Typically, where we plug in is with incumbent institutions, so banks, insurance companies, wealth management organizations, et cetera, who are looking to bring somebody in to do a true version of what digital should look like. Not, we talk a lot about there's a difference between digitizing financial services and actually building truly digital financial services, meaning the products and experiences that are actually built from scratch with the full potential of the technology that's available today, as opposed to taking something analog and just putting it into a digital environment. And so a lot of the demand and opportunity for bringing in a third party to do that stuff sits with the organizations that maybe don't have that internally, or don't, aren't in a place where they want to build that out internally. We do work with fintechs as well, but as you can imagine, a lot of them are already doing truly digital. But that's why we have not just the services piece that will come in and build it for people, but also the product side with Pulse and Foundry that can be applicable to a lot of different businesses at different sizes, and the content piece that can really be relevant to anybody. I mean, really, what we're trying to do on the media side is build build a modern day media company for financial service professionals. So I think a lot of people see our brand at 11FS sitting on the fintech side of the fence, if you will, within our industry, and we certainly do. But who we're speaking to with that audience is anybody who is looking to have a career that's longer than the next 12 months in financial services, because we believe the future is going to be truly digital, and you really need to understand what's shaping those changes that are coming.
Wonderful. And just so we'll get into that, because that's really, I think, the core. I think building an audience, building a media for your niche audience is a great principle. And but to finish on your career, there was an interesting change from CMO to Chief Commercial Officer, from marketing to commercial officer, which I was very curious to see, because I can see from VaynerMedia the CMO role, and then so now it's a lot more sales driven, right? How did that happen? And also,
Yeah. So I started, let's see, last June. Actually, I always remember because Money 2020 in Amsterdam was my first week on the job with 11FS. Um, but I started as CMO, which, like you said, is kind of a natural transition coming from the ad agency world. And then about 6 months in, my role changed into what it is now as Chief Commercial Officer. And so the change there is that I still oversee the media marketing teams that I did when I started, but I also have a wider remit in sales, like you mentioned, and then also running the consulting and research division of the business. So I think it's the media marketing is still a big piece of it, and to be honest, the services business is not too different from what I was doing at VaynerMedia, because that role was much more of like a GM role as the
mhm.
MD of that office, running a services business. And of course, advertising business is slightly different than consulting, but similar type of model. So it wasn't, it was a pretty natural progression for me. And it's been great kind of getting embedded into that. The CCO thing is interesting though, because I think that's one of those titles that can mean anything and nothing, and mean so many different things in so many different places. And actually, I just started with CCO at this great company called Sanctus that's working on mental health for entrepreneurs. It's really fascinating. But he and I just started the CCO support group, if you will, because we were like, hey, there's these CEO groups, these COO groups. What about CCOs? It's a role that a lot of people maybe don't understand, or different people are doing different things within it. So we're trying to bring a little bit more definition and clarity to what it means to be a chief commercial officer in 2020.
Yeah, that's great. And by the way, we should put the link to what you mentioned. There's a great video about digitalization,
Yes.
digital native. Sorry, I'm mixing it up, but we'll put the link to that, and we'll put the link to the group that you're mentioning. And just to finish on that, I think yes, when you talk about it, it sounds absolutely normal, natural. But what a great contrast it is from the, let's say, still the majority of B2B or B2B fintech, where there's a sales role, and I think, uh, not to be too caricatural, but the marketing is a side project that sometimes evolves into
Yeah.
something bigger. But definitely, there's no I mean, it's very rare to have the marketer becoming
Yeah.
CCO. So it really shows
Yeah.
how, it's really. I think as a modern marketing company, it's a great example.
Yeah. And I think more and more you're going to see, whether it's CCO or CRO or whatever the title is, I think you'll see marketing and sales roll up into the same individual at the C-suite level, because really they're two sides of the same coin, and they're both tasked with, in different ways, driving growth of the organization. But you're right, typically and historically, B2B organizations are much more sales led than marketing led, and we are more marketing led than sales led, and there's pros and cons to both. But I think more and more you'll see B2B organizations that um, have more of a balance between an integration between marketing sales, where marketing is not just in support of the sales effort, but actually tasked with building a brands and producing content, and has an identity and an objective to itself. But I think that's so important for any CEO or leadership team to really be honest about, is just that self-awareness of what type of organization are you, so that you can double down on your strengths and shore up your weaknesses. And we're definitely, in large part, among other things, a marketing and brand-led organization at 11FS.
Yeah, and I think the organization, I think eventually that gives a model of organization. It's not about having the sales or the marketing and somehow putting it together. It's about having them together at the top and making them work like this. Um, so to follow up on what you mentioned, branding, which I think definitely stands out at 11FS. Again, it doesn't look like a typical Blink, and you won't see a typical B2B fintech company. Um, so well, how important is that, and how, any tips on crafting a brand across platform? Because it's not just one brand, right? You guys probably have, I don't know, I haven't counted,
Yeah.
but maybe 10, maybe more. And how, how does that help
Yeah.
with the sales?
Yep. So I think we, much like many startups, are not in a place where we have a perfect, clear, quantitative attribution model. We've mapped out the full ROI of like how the brands and doing the brand so well, investing in the brands, actually attributes to sales. But again, coming back to what I was saying about knowing who you are and doubling down on strengths, um, we really believe that brand matters, and we have some fantastic people in the marketing and media and design teams that create, have created a beautiful and very powerful brand at 11FS. So I think that's something and I know, just like I think nobody could really argue that that has definitely contributed to part of our success. How much and what's the actual ROI, I don't know. But I think that, a lot of people talk about how what gets measured gets done, and I totally believe that. But I also believe that not everything that matters can get measured. And sometimes, particularly when you're small, speed is so much more important than having the perfect quantifiable answer to what you should invest in and how much. So if you believe something and you have that strength as a business, and more importantly, you have that fantastic talent within your walls, then you got to double down on what you're really good at, and that will be a competitive advantage against against the businesses that you compete with.
Hmm. A similar question with media. So, of course, you are also, media is also a sort of revenue, which is, so if we try to find, something that's relevant for the average or the typical fintech, that's a bit out of reach, I think, or it's not something that most people will aspire to. We're talking about people who want to get started, basically. So I think, you're definitely building a media for your niche. Uh, but and again, I think it's going to be hard to find the exact ROI. But just to understand a little bit the resources and efforts you put into it, I see, for example, your executive are investing a lot of their time I think it's a daily thing, right?
Yep.
David, the CEO, do this podcasting on a daily thing. So there must be some organizational challenges. I mean, how do you make it work in practice for people who typically will have a very busy schedule with
Yeah.
other stuff?
It's just a question of priorities.
Mm.
I think the things that matter most always get done. So, that's just it's part of who we are, and part of how we have those conversations is for people like David and Simon and Jason and folks that are out there and our hosts, or, um, you know, constantly part of the media offering. Sarah Kachansky is another one. Um, they just prioritize that. They have a lot of other things going on, but we really believe that building this media machine and building the brand through it can add a lot of value, which is then going to help drive the growth of the business. So it's just a strategic decision that we've made that, there's always opportunity cost in the time you invest in doing one thing, because it's not going into something else. So sure, there's an opportunity cost there, but we really believe that spending that amount of time and money in our media business is worth it long term. And yes, it helps that it is revenue generating for us. So we're, making some money through sponsorships and speaking and things like that for the things that we'd want to do anyway to drive
Mm.
the growth of our business. But that's not the priority of doing it. So we're not trying to maximize the profit we can make out of what we do with media. We're trying to do the things that we think are right. And if people are interested in paying us to access our audience through that, then great. We'll take that to help offset the costs.
All right. And again, I'm trying to find lessons, for other fintechs, other marketers. And what's outstanding as well with all the guys you mentioned is, I'd say how they are good at it, or they become good at it. And was it a natural thing, or
Yeah.
is it something that, like me, people are working hard towards getting better, which I'm trying to do?
Yeah. I mean, as always, it's both. You need a certain amount of natural talent, but then you also need to work really hard at it and have the passion and motivation to do so. But I think in terms of lessons for other fintechs out there, I really believe that too many people overthink too many things. And so
Mm.
when it comes to this type of thing, like any business, even a business that's just a one person startup, like, you have value to offer to an audience out there. And with the current state of the technology and social media and digital landscape, like, you can put content out there that people will find. So it's much more about knowing what you're good at and documenting that content and that perspective and putting it out there. And yes, like, doing what you can to help it find an audience, but you might not have a paid media person or an SEO specialist. Like, you just got to get started getting started. Don't overthink it. Like, building a media company, sure, you should put some planning into it, but at the end of the day, just start documenting what you know. And that's a lot of how we think about what we do. Like, we're at a stage where, yeah, there's a 15-person media team, and we have producers and planning cycles and all this stuff. But I remember some conversations that I've had where it's like, we have 180 incredibly smart people. Like, this was back when we were in the office, let's just go get a camera, stick somebody in the studio, and see what they have to say about X topic or Y topic, and put it out there. And it might not be 100,000 views on YouTube type thing, but if it brings value to people, that's the North Star that we use to guide us. So I think that's a big thing for me. Like, yeah, you do need the talented people like the Jasons and the Sarahs that you can put on camera, that are going to be able to connect with an audience and, have something valuable to say. But I think almost everybody does. They just get a little bit stuck on actually taking the leap to produce something. And I think that's because they think too much about having to create it, having it needed to be produced. But it's really just about, it's like this. It's like, you send somebody an email and you get on a Zoom call and you press record, and maybe somebody will find it interesting. But if you think about how can you add value through content, I don't think that will ever steer you wrong.
So if we try to, steal the playbook, and it's actually very easy to steal your playbook because you have it online. There's a great document about 11FS that you made, 11FS Marketing Playbook. So you think this is something that anyone can embark on it? Maybe talking about building a media is a little bit far-fetched, but that's something that let's say a good marketing attempt for any one person startup. Let's try to put content out there and yeah, see how it goes.
Yeah, for sure. And please do link to the playbook if people will find it valuable. But yeah, I mean that, you know, as people will see if they look at it, the North Star is adding value. And that's how we think about everything that we do across both media and marketing. Here, how do we add value to financial service professionals through content and experience? Like that's the brief, you know, and that's how we make decisions about what to do and what not to do and how to prioritize or deprioritize things. But then the first principle within there is to build a media company around what you do. And so it's easier to see after, you know, 4 years at 11FS, not for me, but for the company, like you can see it take shape. And we literally do have albeit small, but we have a media company. But I think anybody, you know, even if it's a founder CEO that's putting 20% of their time towards marketing, like again, producing content that's going to be valuable for the audience you're trying to reach as a business, I think that's where modern day B2B companies should start.
Wonderful. And may I ask, maybe I'll try to reach the limits of this. We've seen some news that 11FS was restructuring, changing the company, possibly layoffs. Does that, and you guys have been, you know, we can talk about it so openly because you guys have been so open and so, you know, great about it, I think. So does that affect in any way the marketing strategy, or do you still absolutely continue the course and this was not a marketing issue at all?
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't affect the strategy. It does affect somewhat how we go about doing what we do. And yeah, we put out a couple of blog posts detailing everything really about what we've been going through and the tough decisions that we had to make. And, you know, that sucked. But we're not the only business in a situation like that. And obviously it's a crazy year and a tough year for so many people. So we're trying to do the best we can. And you know, there's a whole kind of approach to how you go about dealing with something like that when it comes to external communications, which for us is very simple. It's just tell the truth, you know, just like be honest with people. And that's really what it is. But in terms of our marketing, like the strategy is the strategy, you know, that playbook, add value, media company, quantity and quality, you know, all the stuff that's in that playbook that people can go read, like that doesn't change, because that's what we really believe is required to do effective modern day B2B marketing. You know, some of the tactics and certainly the volume of what we can do, because we did have to, the media marketing team was affected. And so we unfortunately did have to let a couple great people go. We're doing a little bit less, and you know, we've had to shift things obviously with COVID, and can't do in-person events, and we don't have access to the studio and all that. So the tactics change as they always do in reaction to the realities that you're faced with, but the strategy stays the same.
Wonderful. And another question, again, to dig further into the strategy. I see, you know, you guys are inviting and having great chats with so many CEOs, executives, marketers in the fintech world, in the finance world in general. So is there part of it which is so it's about content, it's about value, of course. Is there part of it which is also a great way to network? And could people, you know, have a first contact with 11FS by being contacted this way, and then lead to, you know, more meaningful conversations?
Yeah, for sure. And that has happened. One of the things that I'm very adamant about is that we are not choosing our guests based on who we want to do business with. Mm-hmm. Because at the end of the day, for this strategy to work, to build a media company, you need to empower, you know, we have a great executive producer who's leading that team. You need to empower him to do what's needed to build an effective media company, which is produce the best content possible, add the most value possible. And so I can't hamstrung him, you know, I can't handcuff him by saying, hey, you need to have this person on, you need to have this person on. He needs to be able to make, and his team need to be able to make the decisions of the best guests who will add the most value to the audience. If we do that consistently and we execute well, then in the long term, that is the best possible thing that we can do to drive growth of our business. But ideally, you have people on that are the best guests that we can get, and they're potentially people that we do want to do business with, but it's never that way around. It's always, how do we add value? I think about it as church and state, like, which I guess is more of an American reference, but they do need to be separate, even if they do kind of communicate and sometimes overlap.
Sure, sure. And I can only imagine that having, I know the CEO does daily podcast, and I don't know how long it will go on, and it seems like it's an ongoing thing. Well, if you have a conversation with 300 people, or let's say 200 people per year, well, that's a lot of networking to be had in any measure, right? And that's not about immediate gaining clients, but networking is networking, and that's another conversation.
Yeah, and I think just to jump in on that, I mean, that's the thing. That's why I have no problem putting our strategy out publicly on LinkedIn and saying all this stuff about how we do what we do, because I think most, particularly B2B businesses, are not in a place where they're going to be marketing led, or they're going to invest in marketing or think about marketing the way that we do. We have the luxury, which is a conscious decision by our leadership team, to be more long-term oriented than short-term oriented. And whenever you're more long-term oriented, you have the advantage. But a lot of businesses can't do that. But we can invest in a media team and producing content and having the CEO do a daily show that isn't tasked with specifically generating leads for tomorrow, because we believe that's going to be the right thing for the long term. And that's such an advantage strategically. And a lot of people aren't going to be able to do that, or aren't going to want to do that, but I hope they do. And like, all the information is out there to be able to do it. It's just a question of whether you believe in it, whether you're able to do it as an organization, if it lines up to your priorities and strengths. And then, really 80% of it is execution. So, that's why I don't have a problem sharing all of it.
Mm-hmm. So as we now approach towards the end of the interview and look a bit about your more advice vision, fintech, as you said, is a very exciting area. There's so much happening every week, never fails. Is there something that excites you particularly? Is there an area that you think is hotter, more likely to be booming?
Yeah. I mean, I'm by no means an expert. I've only been in this industry for a year, so I'm very much still kind of learning and studying things. I think, one of the biggest takeaways for me after I'd been in this job in this industry for a few months was, wow, as a consumer on the outside, at least in London, you kind of see what you understand to be fintech, Monzo, Revolut, Starling, insurance startups, stuff like that. But that's just the superficial layer. That's the retail banking layer, or the business banking layer. That's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of how much is actually being, how much of the financial services ecosystem is about to be disrupted by technology. So that's where I get a little bit excited, because it's the same thing with disruption in any industry. It's those places that are closest to the consumer that are, while not easy, probably a little bit easier to figure out how you rethink them and launch a challenger, launch a fintech, or a startup in that space. But I think it's those the pieces of the plumbing and the infrastructure and a lot of the B2B stuff that I get excited about when I think about fintech. And that's a lot of what we're looking at. Is, I think, any business, any financial services business needs to figure out their strategy and how they're going to deal with truly digital, because just digitizing what they've done is a checkers move when everybody else is playing chess, and that's going to come really quickly. So yeah, I think there's so much change. It's only going to get quicker, but I'm excited to watch it play out.
Yeah, no, very good answer. And actually, it's a question that I wouldn't know very well to answer, because as soon as I discover, although my background is finance, I discover areas bit by bit, and I was used to think, oh, maybe payments are not that exciting, but then you get a bit into it and you realize, oh, wow, it's exciting, it's changing everything, and it's a, I don't know, trillion something opportunity. Yeah. So, it's very exciting to see that it's happening in our lifetime. So Eric, that's been fantastic. I mean, thank you so much for all your advice for marketers and entrepreneurs as well. I'll just finish with a few lighthearted questions, if you don't mind. Um, Maybe I'll start by asking a question that don't you miss a little bit doing really the fun things that Media would be doing with, I don't know, I see they're into all verticals of content and stuff like that.
You know what? I thought that I might, because one of the things about being in the agency world is that you get to work on so many different businesses, and I always love that, just the challenge and excitement of you're learning about the airline industry one minute and the cellular industry the next minute, and financial services the next. But I haven't even thought about that since I
Mhm.
joined. I think I just love the challenge of like, how do you build a business? How do you build a brand? And there's a lifetime of work to be done to make that happen. So, I think you only think about what you're missing when you're bored, and I've not been bored for a minute since I got here.
Great answer. What would you do if you were to choose a different career path?
Oh man. I think maybe something in hospitality. I've always thought about that. Because again, like I'm just fascinated by people and how they work essentially. I don't know, maybe psychologist, but I don't think I have the discipline to go through all the school that would take. But yeah, I think hospitality is really interesting. Just creating experiences and trying to optimize those experiences. I guess there's obvious similarities to marketing, but maybe something in that space. I think the economics are harder, especially in a COVID world, but maybe that means there's an opportunity. So I think that's what I would go with if I had to decide right now.
Yeah, I used to work. I mean, I used to make content for hospitality businesses, and chefs are definitely a fascinating
Yeah.
personality. There's a lot going on, but somehow I don't miss it. I prefer the intellectual challenge of finance and fintech. A talent or a passion that your average listener wouldn't know about.
I actually went to university for music. So
Oh wow!
I was going to be a jazz saxophone professional for a couple of years there, and then I got a couple of years into it and realized I did not want to try to make a living doing that, and so I switched out and ended up in the nonprofit um, kind of path that I mentioned before, and then got into business and marketing from there. But yeah, for a while there, I played a lot of music.
Multi-talented. And finally, favorite place for holidays?
Somewhere I have not been before.
Cool. Any plans? As we're now
Yeah, we're going to Greece next week. I have been there before, but I have not been to Crete, which is where we're going. So we're going to
I'm
check
half
that out.
Greek, so I highly
Okay.
recommend the choice. And I wish you a really wonderful holiday. I hope it's fresher than here. I'm really, really hot. So on that note, I thank you so much for your time, Eric. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Really fun. Thanks, George.